May peace and blessings be upon you, and welcome to the My Voice show on EOS. You're with your host, Aisha Heather. Today we're joined by a lovely guest. Her name is Amna Ahmad, and she's a high school teacher. I've had the privilege of speaking to her before today's episode, and she only further confirms my belief that we owe it all to our teachers. Thank you so much, Amna, for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So we wanted to speak about ripple effects. I'll give you an example to kind of illustrate what a ripple effect looks like. So let's say you come home from outside and you're in a great mood, but you're a little bored, so you go onto social media. 5 minutes later, you close the tabs and you don't know how, but now you're in a bad mood. And so this is an example of a ripple effect, okay? Some sort of action or a situation has an impact, either positive or negative, sometimes a little bit of both, and then that has its, that impact carries and spreads. So for example, you're in a bad mood now after going onto social media, and let's say someone else comes home, maybe it's your father from work, and the way that you greet him is just a little off, and then that's going to have the impact on him, and that's going to further spread and carry. So this maybe was an example of a negative ripple effect. There are positive ones too. And we just thought it would be great to bring in a teacher, because I feel like teachers can closely observe the ripple effect and maybe even manage it on a daily basis in the classroom. So,
I can see that.
Yeah. So are you mindful of the ripple effect when you are going about in your classroom on a daily basis? How do you approach the classroom on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think so. I think I kind of look at it as energy, you know, just kind of sending good energy or positive energy. As a teacher, I think students kind of feed off of your energy. So if you walk into the classroom kind of tired and slouched and not really into the topic or whatever you're doing that day, the lesson for the day, your students are probably not going to enjoy it as much. But if you walk in with enthusiasm and kind of excited, even if your students are kind of half asleep because it's first period or whatnot, but if you walk in with enthusiasm and an open mind, you definitely see a difference between the two scenarios, and the fact that they will feed off of your energy, and it has an impact on them. If they're having a bad day, they might just for a second forget about it, because they're kind of like, why is she so enthusiastic and, you know, hyper, and it's 8:15 in the morning, she shouldn't be like this, I'm half asleep.
And just have a good laugh at it.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's a great way to start a period, start a lesson, start a day, I think, because, I mean, like I said, they feed off of your energy, you feed off of their energy, so hopefully if you're the one that's starting off with a positive energy, it will carry on throughout the period and make the lesson so much more fun. Yeah. Funner, I was about to say funner, that's not a word, but it'll just make it more enjoyable, obviously, and I think it'll make it more memorable, and if the student can remember the lesson, hey, as a teacher, that check mark, like, you know, that's success. So absolutely, I think it's a daily basis, so it's passing on, and hopefully, regardless of them feeding off their energy, that will maybe pass on throughout the day, and it'll continue on, just like you said, the ripple effect, right?
Well, you know, sometimes, I wonder if you deal with this. Sometimes you feel like you're trying your best to be positive, because I think maybe you have. You probably find yourself having to do that, like you need to be positive for your students. You know, sometimes you're trying so hard to be positive, to spread that positivity, but it can feel like it's making no difference, you know? Have you ever felt that? And then how do you take that? Because it can be a little disheartening, you know?
Sure. I think as a teacher, for me anyways, it's a mindset that sometimes you'll see students succeed right before your eyes, which is always rewarding. It's always really satisfying and makes you really happy. Sometimes they won't show it, but it's just a matter of them processing it. So it's like a simple example is them understanding a concept right away, or maybe taking a couple of weeks or a month, or maybe by the end of the semester, by the exam, they finally get it, or maybe they won't just get it just yet. So knowing that, I think it's it's just a mindset of being satisfied that have you tried your best? I mean, how can you define perfection? You can't, and nobody can be perfect. Everybody's going to see you in a different light, you know, regardless of their experience, you know, as a result of their experiences, sorry. So I think it's important that if you are able to do your best, you'll automatically have that satisfaction that you've done your best. And as a teacher, you're just hoping that you've kind of planted a seed. You know, if it's a word of encouragement, they might not, you know, smile right away or be happy right away, but you're hoping that word or that conversation of encouragement or has an impact on them, that one day, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe a year, maybe 10 years from now, you're hoping that they'll remember that and go, oh, I remember my teacher saying this about me, and the fact that I just have to do this, or that I'm an amazing person regardless of what my test says, or whatever the case may be, right? So I think it's just important that you're trying your best. Perfection, I don't think anybody can achieve perfection, right? So if we're gonna constantly be stressed about perfection, you're always going to be, I think to some degree, feeling like you're a failure, which is not true. So I think you try your best.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I also just wanted to mention that I have a great deal of respect for teachers, because I think sometimes you don't necessarily, you know, you're trying so hard and sometimes you won't see like the fruits of your hard work right away. Yeah, sometimes it'll take years, and they'll be like, oh, you know, the student will like think back and be like, oh, you know, like,
so it's just a hope in us that, you know, and that.
And we do remember you.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah, so I remember my teachers, right? That's exactly how I see it as well, right? I remember them saying these things, and you're like, oh yeah, and then you're like, I hope I have that kind of impact on my students too. Yeah.
Okay, well, I wanted to ask you another question about the ripple effect. What particular ripples are you mindful of in your life? And this can extend beyond the classroom. So I guess just think about it in terms of certain actions that have like consequences. Like, what are some of your actions that you are mindful of in your everyday life?
Right.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to me is kindness. I think it's pretty easy, but it has such a lasting effect on somebody, regardless of if they are very well, you know, a really good friend or a stranger. Like I said, everybody has bad days, so sometimes it doesn't come across, but that type of ripple, I think, extends, because it's one of those, like, you know, the idea of paying it forward. It might just be the littlest thing, and then you feel like doing something else for somebody else because that feeling was so good that you want to be able to give somebody else that feeling, right? So I think that's one of, and I think it just encompasses a lot of stuff, right? Like even gratitude, okay, just being happy, just being thankful for what you have. And like we know, nobody's life is perfect, regardless of what social media, what we might see on social media, right? That's just a snapshot, and you're not, I remember I saw on the internet how they kind of give you a background view of the pictures that people take, and it's like the ugliest scene, but you know, they've taken this small little picture, and it seems like they're in this amazing place. But that's exactly it. So I think you have to just be mindful of, and remember that, you know, just being thankful for what you have, because, you know, that also will be a ripple effect. If you're happy, if you're content, that kind of exudes, and then somebody else that talks to you, they kind of feel that positive vibe and positivity too, right? That's kind of a, regardless, you smile, it's like one of those, you know, what is it, the biggest charity, right? And somebody else, you see somebody else smile, and it just kind of keeps going like a ripple. So I think, I can see how that, regardless of teaching or not, I think those are probably one of the biggest ones I can think of.
So next we have a question from our team. A way to understand the ripple effect is basically that our actions have consequences, right? Our action always has an impact. And I think if you sort of become a little obsessed with this idea, you can become a little afraid, and you're constantly trying to say or do the perfect thing. And what can happen is you fall into this hole of where you wear a mask of false optimism. So what can we do? You know, they ask, how do we be positive while remaining authentically ourselves?
I think everybody knows that no one is perfect, right? So, and I think if we're gonna constantly be, there's nothing wrong with striving for perfection, I guess, to some degree, but to make it such that it has a negative impact, I think is where it becomes detrimental, right?
True.
Sorry, so what was the question again? I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And we're going to take a break quickly, so I guess we'll try and answer this in like a minute. How do we be positive while remaining authentically ourselves?
I think as long as you are satisfied with what you're doing, if you get that satisfaction and happiness, then regardless of it being what you thought was going to be perfect, I think that's important. And I think it's just sometimes important to be real, right? Sometimes why wear the mask? Everybody's human too, right? And everybody has gone through ups and downs, and hopefully they will realize that. And somebody else's reactions may not be what you should take personally, because it's just human not to be perfect. And why wear a mask when you can be real? Right? This is just how that works. So I think just being yourself, being true to yourself, I think will even eliminate the mask part. And life is about ups and downs and just learning from the downs and then enjoying the ups, kind of thing, right?
I like how you mentioned strive to do your best, but like if it comes to a point where it's, you know, or like strive to be positive, but if it comes to a point where it's becoming like hard or negative, a negative thing or detrimental to you, then what's the point?
Exactly.
All right. All right. So we're just going to take a short break. We have more to share after the break, so please stay tuned. Welcome back to the My Voice show on EOS. You're with your host, Aisha Heather. Before the break, we were speaking with our guest, Amna Ahmad, who is a high school teacher. We were speaking about the ripple effect, essentially how an action or a situation has its impact, either positive or negative, or a little bit of both, and then that spreads and carries. So Amna, earlier you talked a little bit about social media, and I have a question about social media. So with social media and the frenzied society that it kind of creates that we live in, you know, you can have a lot of propagating of negativity, so anxiety, judgment, hostility, and there's other feelings as well. Do you see this in students' lives and in others' lives? How do you think we can dampen these negative ripples that social media creates, or even transform these negative ripples into positive ripples?
Right. Well, obviously, the youth are heavily into social media. It's definitely a part of their everyday life, and I think you do see the effects of it. Sometimes when a student is not themselves, if I do ask them everything's okay, a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, miss, I'm okay. They're not going to tell me, but or if they are comfortable enough, they'll explain what happened, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, you even hear about bullying instances online and things like that. So those happen in schools, and you hear about them. So it does have an impact on them for sure. I think the important part of social media is we know that it has its pros and its cons, but I think it's just being aware of what that looks like for different people. We know that, like I mentioned before, sometimes it's just a zoomed in picture of something and it's terrible. It's actually, or it's that one amazing moment in somebody's life, and now you just have this image that that's how their life is all the time. Oh my gosh, I wish I had. It's like this envy type of attitude, whereas they might just have a similar life to you, or even you might have a better life than them. You don't know what they're hiding. The thing about social media is it's kind of a mask to some degree, right? You can kind of hide yourself from it, or some people use it to express themselves. So you see both sides of the story. And I think it's important, and as teachers we try to teach them the what reality is
Yeah.
to some degree, and the fact that to be able to decipher, to be able, just like, you know, when we teach them about credible sources,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is a credible, Wikipedia is not a credible source, but
I use
you know, it's a good beginner, but I don't want it to be sourced in my lab report, right?
That's what they always tell us.
That's right.
Beginning place.
So having that knowledge, I think, will bring reality back to people's lives, right? Understanding that this is a snapshot at one moment in somebody's life doesn't mean that this is always them, or is it them just recording just the happy points in their life, right? Which, if they, you know, they have the right to do, it's cool, whatever. But you have to also see how that impacts your life, your mood that day, or your, in general, your self-esteem to some degree, right? Your self-confidence. I think just having that knowledge is really important. And if you realize that every time you go on social media, you do see a change in your mood. Like you had mentioned before, that sometimes you just go on and then all of a sudden you're either angry or you're sad or you're disappointed or whatever the case may be. I think you have to understand that at that point you have to snap out, just take a break, right? If anything in your life, if it's overcoming you to a point where it's taking you to the wrong side, not, I shouldn't say the wrong side, but a negative side, you know, self-loathing side or whatever, something that's, you know, detrimental to yourself, you have to take a step back. And if you don't recognize it, you hope that somebody around you, one of your loved ones, kind of gives you that guidance. And as teachers, we are talking to students about that regularly, right? So we're hoping that, like I said before, hoping that that seed, that, you know, that conversation that we had with them has an impact on them, and that they have to realize that they are good enough as their own person, and they don't have to live somebody else's life, or their life doesn't have to match somebody else's life. As long as they're content, as long as they are happy with what they want to do, that's what's important. And I think slowly students are understanding the concept of being content. So hopefully they're getting there. But like I said, there's also a lot of positivity that you can find on social media. The information, you can see how people have overcome challenges and they share their stories. And you know, in general, certain people will relate to that, and that will also help somebody in their personal life. So I think overall, if it's having a positive impact, then that's great. But if you notice that it's having a negative impact, hopefully be conscientious of that as you are watching those, you know, stories or whatever, Instagram stories or Snapchat stories or whatever, the pictures on the internet and whatnot. So
like be conscientious when you're on social media. And like in general, whenever you put yourself in some sort of a situation, just be conscientious.
Absolutely.
Like what is this, how is this making me feel?
Exactly. Exactly. And like I said, you tell these, you know, you say this to your students, you tell this, you're just hoping that they hold on to it, right? And if they don't hold on to it today, hopefully if they're ever in that situation, they remember those words that, you know, somebody that cared for them said to them, and hopefully that will get them through some tough times.
And sometimes you just need to experience in order for it to make sense to you.
Absolutely.
I feel like you just have to go through it.
And I honestly say that to my students. I'm like, I know right now it's just gibberish. I know you're probably like, everybody says this, but, and I tell them, I go, one day I hope it will click. And I sometimes talk about their frontal cortex still developing. Like, it's okay, you guys are teenagers, still developing, brain still trying to figure it out, but one day, hopefully. And when they have to make those big decisions, you can only hope that they'll do what's right.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So do you see this sort of do you see a difference in because you get to work with youth through being a high school teacher, and you also get to be a part of like the crowd where there are adults, and do you see that certain ripples are more apparent, more prevalent in one generation while they aren't in the other? So like we could talk about social media, but we can talk about other things too.
So yeah, well, I think social media is relatively new. So we haven't seen we haven't seen a whole generation go through it completely yet. You know, my generation was getting, you know, the beginning ends of it or whatever. Now, high school generation is almost growing up with it to some degree. You know, they've probably seen it as they were younger. So yeah, I think, I'll be honest, maybe as adults, but like I said, you know, as adults with experiences, you realize and you know how to prioritize and you understand the importance. But like I said, if sometimes it can have an effect on an adult too. If you're watching enough and you're seeing friends doing this, friends do that, oh, that's how it's gonna be, or that's how it should be, or oh man, I'm bored, I'm like going to work, coming home, I'm not doing anything fun, or whatever the case may be. It's gonna have an effect on an adult too. But I think because it seems like it's more natural for the younger generation. So I think maybe because of that, they might be a little bit more conscientious because they're maybe seeing you know, they're constantly being told the impacts of social media and the credibility of certain things on social media. So you're hoping that they're a little bit, they'll get to the point where they can make good judgment calls on that. I hope adults can make those judgment calls. But like I said, hey, we're humans, right? You don't know how it's going to impact you or not. So there's definitely a difference. We're not, you know, the adults are not as, I think, just because of life. I think the adults are not as attached, but I can't say that either, right? There's adults that are really into social media, and even as teachers, sometimes we, you know, display student work through social media so parents can see what you know their children are doing. So like I said, there's pros and cons, and I think we just have to make sure that it's not negatively impacting us and that we use it as a positive vehicle.
From speaking with you, I'd say that you're a positive person. Would you, you laugh. Would you say that positivity is a personality or is it a learned attitude?
I can see why people might say it's a personality because some people are just naturally bubbly and that comes across as positive maybe.
Whereas they might not actually be.
Yeah, maybe, right? Or sometimes somebody's just quiet, but you don't know how they approach every single day. Maybe it is with positivity, right? So I don't know what that definition would be for personality-wise, but I think it's something that can be learned to some degree. I think just being content with what you have, like gratitude, like I've mentioned before. Gratitude is a big thing now, right? In order for mental health even, just to be content with what you have. And sometimes that means taking a step back from social media and going, okay, you know what, my life, I need to be able to focus on my life and maybe not focus on watching somebody else's Instagram stories or whatnot. And try to concentrate on what I want to do, right?
I don't have Instagram, so I don't really know what that's
like, you know, those little, okay, that's funny, it's funny, I know. Well, I'm a high school teacher, I have to keep up with all the social,
I'm kind of an old
that's
soul,
okay.
So I'm really
you know, Facebook posts, whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah,
like it's
Facebook,
just,
I understand.
there you go. So, but yeah, I think you can, and I think you know, I think it's important to be around positivity too. I think if you're kind of going through a slum, if you can surround yourself with positivity, I think you'll figure out what you can do to implement that into your life. So yeah, I don't think it's, I don't know if I truly agree it to be a complete personality thing. Some people might show it more than others, but I don't think that would say that somebody that may not outwardly be, you know, let's say somebody that's quiet or something, just because they're quiet or they're not saying anything doesn't mean that they're positive.
It could be a mindset.
Absolutely, and I think I agree with you.
Yeah, I think the whole like looking at someone else's story too, like the way that you're approaching it, if you're doing it with a mindset where like, oh yeah, you know, like it's giving you inspiration, or that works, and do it all you want to, right?
Or just being happy for somebody else that they're being, you know, they're doing this, that sounds amazing. Exactly, so it's a mindset. So if after going on social media your mood hasn't changed, or you know, nothing has impacted you negatively, then you have a positive mindset, right? And I think that's really really important. And I think it is learned. Like if you feel like it's a personality, I don't think it's that. I think you can learn it if that's what your goal is, to become more positive, right?
All right. Okay. Well, those were all the questions.
Okay.
But before I end off, I do want to thank you. I want to thank you for the incredible work that you do. I know it really goes a long way in your students' lives and the lives that they touch. And yeah, I also want to take a moment to thank my teachers. You are the light of my life, and I've learned so much from you. Thank you for everything you've taught me. So thank you.
Nice. I'm not even, you weren't my student, but that was so nice.
My teachers are my best friends.
That's good. Well,
Yeah,
it's probably the most rewarding part of teaching, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of why teachers go into it,
Yeah.
is that hopefully we're helping somebody.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amna.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today, everyone. Please visit our website, myvoicecanada.com, to check out our magazines. You can also tune in for next week. We're going to have another episode, another guest, and we're just going to end off this one with a thank you video to all of our teachers. We love you so much. You really are making a difference, and you can really spread a lot of positive ripples. So thank you for that. Take care.
To my teachers, thank you for being my mentors.
For showing up every day with energy and dedication and enthusiasm.
And they always take the time out of their day to help me, and I think that's really changed the way that I feel about coming to school.
I'm really grateful for not just having an academic experience, but also having these other side experiences that made me who I am today.
And to know that numbers aren't everything, they don't define you, especially when they're on the report card.
Let me take my own path when I was like trying to communicate my thoughts. There's this one teacher in particular, my biology teacher, who said these few words to me and has always inspired me from that moment moving forward. Regardless of your goal, you might have one goal, the same goal as others, but there's always going to be different pathways to reach that goal.